So we all have that one friend that just changes personalities constantly, right? And Google is definitely that friend of the smartphone world. Their Pixel phones have never really retained an identity over the past 6 years. And the Pixel 5 is definitely an iteration of a very, very interesting personality. Let's talk. Prior Pixels leading up to the Pixel 5 all used Qualcomm's top-end processors. But in 2020, Google decided to change stuff up and use a mid-ranger Snapdragon 765G processor. Part of this was because of the supply chain shortages back in 2020 when it was like the height of the COVID pandemic. But also, those prior processors were really sucking the Google Pixels dry of their battery life, which we will talk about later on this phone. And so I think Google also wanted to make a cheaper alternative as their Pixels really weren't selling well before the Pixel 5. And in 2020, this phone was honestly a great buy. I mean, especially the battery life. That 765G wasn't the greatest performer, but it really pushed this at the time biggest in a Pixel battery to new heights. And this personality from Google is definitely minimalistic, and well, you can definitely see that in the design. The design of the Pixel, as some people have said, looks like a bathroom tile. Now that I've heard about it, I can't unsee it. But the phone itself is compact at 6.1 inches. And the design itself is very plasticky, but there is an aluminum part of the phone. The casing itself I think is in aluminum, and there is a little cutout that allows it to wireless charge, which is really cool. Great design, Google. And I think it's really held up over the past couple of years. It still looks really unique. The camera bump I think could have looked a little better, but for the time and according to the Pixel 4 design language, I think the camera bump looks perfectly fine. The screen on the phone was not necessarily class leading for a Pixel. It was kind of a downgrade from the 4 XL. It was only 1080p, but it did have 90 Hz, so Google didn't, take away all our cake, right? And it's a really great display with good colors, but I have one gripe with this display. As you might see, there is no speaker grill on this phone, right? And you might wonder, how are you going to take phone calls without a speaker grill? They put the speaker underneath the display, and they used a vibrating mechanism instead of actually having a physical cutout. And I think this was definitely a wrong decision to make. When I take phone calls with anything but a $1,000 plus phone on the other side, the microphone quality on the other end just doesn't get through. It feels like it's muffled by the screen, and I really don't like it. Also, the stereo playback isn't the greatest, as the bottom firing speaker will always be louder no matter what. However, the saving grace of the Pixel 5 would probably be the cameras. The cameras on this phone were really good for the time and still hold up here in 2022, as they still capture great images with good detail and amazing dynamic range. It's a Google Pixel. I mean, what else could you really expect? And it actually outclasses the newer 6A in this regard, as the ultra-wide sensor is 16 megapixels compared to 12 on the 6A. So in some respects, I think that this camera system definitely beats the 6A, even though it's 2 years older. For a phone that launched at $699 back in 2020, the charging wasn't amazing. It was 18 watts, and for a 4,000 milliamp hour battery, it fills up pretty slowly. It took me 2 hours, 0 to 100 on my 18 watt PD charger, and on a wireless charger it took me over 3.5 hours. But thankfully the battery does last all day. So if you are charging, it's most likely going to be at night. If you need a midday top up, I guess you just plug it in and see how it fares. Even 10% will get you a long way on this phone, so I wouldn't really be too worried about the battery life, but the charging is kind of subpar. Although this device is 2 years old, I would argue that you could still use this device for another 2 years, as it just got Android 13, and it will be eligible for Android 14 next year, and you can just use it until Android 15 comes out. And with this phone going for as low as $300 on Amazon, it's a really great buy, as the software and the performance will just continue to get slicker and slicker over time, even though the processor is kind of mid-tier. And the phone itself is just a great phone, and I really can't fault it other than the charging. If you like the review, like, subscribe, put the notification bell to the ring sensor, whatever it's called, I don't know. Yeah. So, I guess we're just here now, huh? Might as well, like, click off, because I'm done.